Guys, we have a show to do. I don't know what's happening, Ben. You're back on the show for 10 minutes and suddenly
complaining about how much money people are giving you.
In your monologue city, and we're here to do a job. If you want to set up a business, if you want to do a business meeting call sometime in the future, we can talk business. But this is content.
You guys have to. I can't wait to tell you about my drink this week. I got the
then
craziest
let us do the
thing.
show.
All right.
We'll never hear about it unless
we do.
What order are we doing here?
We got to do what are we drinking as soon as possible? Because I want to start drinking this.
Oh, that's not how we do things, and you know that, Ben.
Why not?
We're gonna do colonization. Colonization drinks. Cool. Population crash. PaleoPOW out. You ready, Ben?
Yep.
Okay.
What?
It's just funny. It's funny having you back, and we've immediately descended into like something good. So we're so off topic. 20 minutes in, we haven't even started the show. It's just funny. It just makes me laugh.
That's how it works.
That's how it works.
From ScienceSortOf.com, you're listening to Science Sort of.
Welcome to Science Sort of. You're listening to episode 306. Our theme this week is the world without us. I am your host, Ryan Halpton. Joining me to talk about things that are science, things that are sort of science, and things that wish they were science. It's Patrick back for 2 episodes in a row. No, not 2 episodes in a row. Sort of 2 episodes in a row. Yeah. We've recorded back in a row, episodes. But you're not going to hear them in a row. I'll tell you that. But Patrick, you're back.
Here I am.
How's it going, man?
Pretty good.
And announcing the triumphant return of one Dr. Benjamin Tippett.
Good evening, everyone.
Hey, Ben, welcome back.
Hey, man.
Where'd you go?
I have a podcasting nook. I'm almost in podcasting business again.
Awesome. We are happy to have you back. It's exciting.
Hooray.
Well, Ben, now that you're back, let's talk about genocide.
Yes.
Patrick, you were excited to talk about the destruction of a people. What's on your mind? What's going on?
Oh, that's tough to come back from.
That's true of pretty much any genocide. Yeah.
This, so I guess the popular press article we found was in the BBC.
But this one made the rounds. I saw this one going around a lot.
Yeah, it references an article called Earth System Impacts of the European Arrival and Great Dying in the Americas After 1492. And you can find that in Quaternary Science Reviews. And it's got Alexander Koch, not sure, Koch from University College London as the primary author.
Et al.,
yes. And the gist of it is that there was a cold spell in the 15th century. Actually, it was in the 16th century, right? So after Europeans showed up in the Americas and brought with them guns, germs, and steel. Then
everybody died of reading the book.
Right.
They're like, oh, Papua New Guinea. Oh.
So, many of them were shot or killed in other ways by Europeans. And many of them had never been exposed to smallpox and other European diseases. And so millions and millions of people died as a result of Europeans showing up in the Americas. And essentially, as a result, the sort of land that was being cultivated and maintained either through fire or just through hacking back encroaching vegetation so that you could grow crops on it was sort of let to be run wild again. And fast growing plants started to take that back over. And as a result, there was a big drawdown in CO2 levels due to all that photosynthesis going on. And the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere fell by 7 to 10 ppm. So we right now are adding like 3 ppm a year in terms of fossil fuels. Yeah, ppm. So that, but we were doing nowhere near that back then. Although we probably were adding more than you would think, just based on sort of people tend to burn a lot of stuff and put a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere.
So it seems like the main thing that this study was doing was trying to come up with a holistic estimate of the population of the Americas before and after European arrival.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like they're estimating that there were about 60 million people living in North America. before, or I guess they said 60 million people in the Americas, so I guess that would include North, South, Central, which they say would have accounted for about 10% of the world's population, and they think that would have fallen by as much as 90%. They say about maybe 56 million people died after the introduction of Europeans, which I think is primarily disease, right?
I think so.
There was a lot of complicated violence on the parts of European
Maybe I'm just making
states
myself
which are
feel better.
responsible for that. Yeah, there was a lot of. I don't like. I tried to read that Howard Zinn People's History of America, and it was just too depressing. And it covered, like, the first chapter covers pretty much what happened after Columbus came, and you're just like, oh my God. It's just like endless, the amounts of violence, like not just disease, not just violence, but also like deliberate slavery, starvation. Like it's, we use the word decimate to describe something really bad happening, right?
Yeah, that's not the correct use of that word at all. Is that where you're going with this?
No. Well, decimate is, it was a punishment for centurions, right? Where if you had some centurions who were misbehaving, you'd line them up and kill 10% of them. And that's decimating. That's in normal vocabulary, that's like as bad as it can get is 10% of your people dying. This is 10% of your people surviving.
Yeah.
Like when people imagine like zombie epidemics and everybody being dead in a short period of time, that's kind of what Europe did to the Americas immediately after, right?
No, I've used that analogy before, Ben, because I basically have said it's when the European settlers actually came to settle permanently. They were basically settling in a post-apocalyptic wasteland for what the Native Americans had just gone through. Yeah, there were abandoned villages they had to house themselves in because they were so unprepared. Were they abandoned, or were those divine providence showing that God really wanted them to have that land? Howard Zinn, you bummed me out. But that's, isn't that what the settler, but I've read that that's what like the settlers thought. They thought like, oh, this is clearly a sign from, the divine that like we're supposed to be here because all these plants are already planted in rows somehow.
I mean, I assume it would be easy to draw that conclusion.
Yeah, if that was your worldview, that is where you would go with that. But yeah, with the hindsight of history from our modern perch of, cultural superiority, we can kind of chuckle at that, I think. But yeah, so the interesting thing was all of the land that the Native Americans would have been using for crops and just living on was suddenly overtaken by the native plants. And that created this CO2 drawdown that was significant enough to, along with maybe some other external factors, actually change Earth climate.
Yeah. What got me most excited about this story was that the amount of land they think was sort of rewilded was 56 million hectares, which is about the size of France. So I was like, well, that seems doable, given the entire land on the globe. It seems like we could get forest to grow again, like keep what we've got and add to it something the size of France, and it would make a significant amount. It would make a noticeable difference in climate, right? So that, to me, indicated something achievable and somewhat optimistic. And I haven't seen anything in climate news to make me optimistic lately. So that's as close as it gets.
I found that stat a little bit depressing because essentially another glass is half empty way to say the same thing is you can rewild an area the size of France and you'll only undo about 2 years of climate. Like we could rewild an area the size of France somehow if that area was not being used to do who knows what, plant trees. Okay, it grows back, and then that only takes us back to what, 2017.
There's the idea that like that land was being used for food, and that's still something we have to contend with today in terms of land use.
Oh, jeez.
Granted, there are ways we could change the food system to maybe make it a little bit more efficient or a little bit more egalitarian or just a little bit more sustainable. And those are, bigger topics than we have time to discuss in this segment. But I do also think about the fact that this was happening on a continental scale, whereas if you actually did rewild a 55 million hectare area or like 56 million hectare area in like a tight clump, I don't know that it would have the same effect as if you spread it out over a continent,
Yeah, maybe. Just because like in the middle of that, you have like edge effects, I guess. So in the middle of that tight clump, it's going to be harder for things to like grow than at the edge. Yeah.
And I've also read that there's like a latitudinal effect here that, when you're paying for like carbon offsets for your flight and they say they're going to plant trees, like where they plant those trees matter. And so if you're planting things closer to the equator, you're going to have a bigger drawdown than if you are planting things, further from the equator. I don't know.
Well, that makes sense.
Really, if you just like let some of the soybean farms in Brazil go back to the Amazon, it would probably have a pretty quick. Well, actually, I don't know because I don't know what's been done to the soil there because those rainforest soils are so fragile. They are. That system is so tight in terms of nutrient cycling that I don't know what happens if you just let those soybean farms go now. All right. Well, thanks for talking me out of my somewhat optimistic mood, everyone.
Yeah, don't feel optimistic about the future. Afterwards, the sun's going to go out. And afterwards, there's going to be heat death of the universe.
Well, but I think we need to get past the current crisis before we can start worrying about the sun going out, Ben. And I don't know. I mean, maybe this is cause for optimism. Maybe this does mean that paying for the carbon offset, has value and can produce a bigger impact than just assuaging your guilt for that flight you just booked.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, like I said a few episodes ago, I think we're at the point where we're going to have to suck carbon dioxide out of the air through some sort of engineering scheme. We have to make a machine and, use solar power to power that so that we're not adding fossil fuel burnage back into the atmosphere and sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere at the same time. So.
Well, Patrick, you can be hopeful because we're back to having measles outbreaks in the U.S. So
that's true. That's true.
So we're getting back to that sort of right around when Columbus came time with preventable diseases running rampant.
All right, Ebola may still be some potential there.
Oh God.
And since you and I last recorded, Patrick, the Green New Deal has been officially announced as something they're going to try to pass through Congress. And, there's going to be a lot of criticism. There's going to be a lot of finagling, whatever. We're not here to make a political statement on whether or not the things specifically proposed by the Green New Deal are a good idea or not. But I did see a joke on Twitter that was one of the criticisms to get the Green New Deal is that it's going to be very expensive. And they were like, well, if you think fighting climate change is going to be expensive, wait till you see how much
evacuating the East Coast is.
Yeah, the pilgrimage from the East Coast is going to cost us. That's not going to be cheap either. Yeah.
Sure. Like we said before, the good news is it's all GDP, right?
Jeez.
Whether you want to spend it building new infrastructure or you want to spend it moving everybody
evacuating major coastlines. Yeah.
Good news is it all goes to your bottom line when you're deciding which country is best by how much GDP they produce.
Ben, I'm guessing you're happy to be up in the mountains.
Hey, I moved here for a reason, but I miss being optimistic about the future. Remember in 1995 when you could be like, in the future, we're going to have flying cars and everything's going to be solar powered and it's going to be great.
But the future was 2000 back then.
Yeah.
Julie told me about something work related and she was like, yeah, it's going to be in 2020. And in my mind, I thought that was at least 5 years away.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I was like, and then it hit me. I was like, oh, that's next year. Oh, shoot. Okay, we don't have as much time to deal with that as I thought. Patrick, another benefit to, if you want to feel optimistic, right? Just think if we do start rewilding now as compared to the 1600s, there's so much more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, those plants are going to grow better.
I hope.
So that you got that to be optimistic about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but carbon in the atmosphere isn't the rate determining step for plant growth.
So I've actually been reading up on this for a completely different thing that has nothing to do with the show, but for like actual research stuff. They have shown experimentally that plants grown under artificially inflated carbon dioxide ppms do produce more biomass. I think they produce it more quickly than the same plants grown under uninflated carbon dioxide conditions. However, in terms of like nutrient density, the plant biomass that's produced, even though there's more mass, it is overall less nutritious because it has a higher carbon to nitrogen ratio, which you can kind of think of as like the ratio of starches and cellulose to things like protein, which actually will help, feed you if you are eating a plant. And they found that the increased biomass also comes with increased tannins, which are difficult to digest, as well as the potential for increased amounts of secondary metabolites because they're not as nutrient stressed as they would be under normal atmospheric conditions. So how about that, Ben?
Boo to that, right? That's the right reaction. Right?
I guess. I mean, unless you want to go ice skating on the Thames, in which case we got to do something.
Well, I don't know.
I thought this article, this pop article that we were reading, like it was on the BBC website. I didn't note that it was the BBC specifically.
Oh, so you're like, why are they talking about England so much?
The article was like, so 90% of the population of the Americas died after enduring European colonization, and that had a huge effect because the Thames froze several times. Like it brings it up like 4 times in the article. It's just like, now listen, this has big news because the Thames froze. You're like, what? But yeah, and then I was like, oh, it's the BBC. So they're like, oh, what does this have to do with us? Aside from like all of our stuff.
One thing this study did do that is kind of cool, Patrick, that I was surprised you didn't bring up when we first talked about it. I will point out, we said it's published in Quaternary Science Reviews, but it is also open access, so anyone can go check it out.
Yes.
And their figure 1, they got a little stable isotope action.
Yeah, it's sweet. I mean, that's basically how you figure out how much carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere in the past.
Right. So you take these ice cores, from polar regions. In this case, their ice core they were looking at was from Antarctica. And then you can look at the carbon dioxide just as a like absolute amount. So like what is the ppm of CO2? And they see that there's this dip, right after the Great Dying. But you can also look at the ratio of heavier stable carbon-13 to lighter carbon-12, and that ratio will tell you an indication of the source of the carbon dioxide that you're seeing. So you can tell if it's coming from was there a big drawdown or an outgassing from the ocean, or is this coming from terrestrial sources, or what kind of plants, or burning? Burning of fossil fuels has its own sort of distinct signature. And so they were able to see that this shift in the carbon dioxide was coming from a terrestrial source, which they're linking temporally to the, 56 million hectares of land being taken back by the forest in the Americas. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, it's notable to note here that we've heard
usually how notable things are.
Well, I mean, we're a podcast, so even though this is obvious to y'all, it should be said that, there's lots of different explanations for the Little Ice Age, from solar flare activity changing. Mm-hmm. That was like a sunspot minimum. There's the explanation of like volcanoes erupting, right? We've heard of lots of different explanations. So this one is notable because of the stable isotope chemistry Ryan just mentioned, which is to say, hey, they have a smoking gun. It's not just them saying, well, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere dropped and it was coincidentally on this side. You can do chemistry to the ice core samples to determine that, it was enormous plant growth.
Right.
Fueled this drop in CO2.
Which means we're doing more than just correlating these two events in time. So we're not just saying the timing of the Little Ice Age and the timing of the Great Dying line up. We're also saying chemically there's a reason to believe those two are actually causal.
That's right.
Which is cool. And I mean, I am a big fan of there's no reason to pick just one thing, right? Sure. I feel like especially with big climate effects, there can always be a 1-2 punch waiting in the wings. So this is not to say that volcanic activity couldn't have played a role, but we're trying to define the scale and magnitude of who was doing what when, It is a cool study though, I think, Patrick.
Yeah, I thought it was super interesting.
And just for those keeping score at home, I'm still skeptical of the term Anthropocene. I'm still not fully on board with using it. I'm still not sure we've earned it.
Why? What else do we have to do?
I don't know. Yeah. I feel like in terms of geologic timescales, we're still a blip, and we just haven't had a.
Well, I mean, like in terms of geological timescales, a meteor hitting the Earth is a blip, or a comet.
But it's one that's pretty, depending on the size of the asteroid, it's big enough to see as a distinct event. And I mean, I'm not sure. And I'm open to being convinced. I'm just not sure that the impact we've had on the geologic rock record is substantial enough that if geologists were looking at the rocks from now, 1 million years from now, we would look like anything more than a blip. And I don't think a blip counts. The moment the asteroid hit is the transition between the Cretaceous and the Paleogene, but it's not itself a geologic age.
Yeah, but I mean, so it is a transition. So like they'll be like, oh wow, hey, right around the time all the animals died, there's a whole bunch of plastic beads that entered the rocks around this time. Lots of little plastic beads.
So I feel like we could be labeled as like, here's the anthropogenic event, and then after the anthropogenic event, maybe it's like the muerte scene, like the death scene because everything was dead, or like the gala scene because it's all just chicken bones, or the vaca scene because it's all just cow bones. Like, I just, I feel like we are being hubristic and giving ourselves too much credit this early on in what might eventually be termed the Anthropocene. And I think Earth would be better off if there wasn't an Anthropocene. I think if we're early enough in it, we can maybe cut it off at the pass and do things differently. I don't know.
Well, we're already I don't know. We'd already named the Holocene essentially for people anyway. So I don't know why we need
another transition.
Yeah.
But one of the points the authors made was that you could maybe push back the start of the Anthropocene to the European colonization of Americas, as opposed to putting it at the Industrial Revolution in the late 1800s, or even at the dawn of the nuclear age in the late 40s, early 1950s. So, I mean, that's an interesting argument. And if, the more you push back the Anthropocene in time, the more likely I think it is to have a meaningful impact on the rock record. But yeah, I'm admittedly being slow to be convinced on this one. So it's not to say that as a term of art. I
just couldn't care less really on this one.
But as a term of art, if it gets people motivated to do things differently, then I think, we can use it. I'm just not sure it's ever going to be a scientifically valid or useful term. That's all.
Cool.
I don't know how to transition with you not caring about things, Patrick.
We should call it the not caring a scene.
Some things we could do with the plants that after they've drawn down their CO2, they still have some other good uses.
The apathetic scene.
The apathocene. Well, I kind of like the apathocene, the age of people not caring.
Lethargicene.
Lethargicene. That's just how you feel, Ben.
That's how I feel every day. That's my life.
Well, one thing that might make you less lethargic is a zesty beverage. And zesty beverage is exactly the kind of thing we like to consume in our next segment coming up called What Are You Drinking? Be an episode of the show if we didn't also talk about what we are drinking. Ben, it's been so long since we've enjoyed your presence on the show. I'm dying to know what it is you're drinking.
All right. So for my comeback, I had to find something interesting to drink. So I went to all the grocery stores to find anything that was, not super boring. And I did in Superstore, which is a large grocery store. Actually, you know what? I think this was in Safeway. Never mind that. But it's Grace brand peanut punch. It's some kind of peanut drink from the Caribbean. Let's try it. Oh, yummy. Oh, it's like drinking peanut butter. Oh, I love this.
What? Doesn't sound good at all.
You like peanut butter?
Dang, man. This is on the list of things I never get to drink again because it's too yummy. Oh, well done, Grace. Grace's peanut punch. If you want to drink sweet peanut juice. Yeah. They sell it in juice boxes, so you can bring it with you on the trail or in the car if you want. Drink it on the road, drink it at home, bring it to the bar and drink it at the bar. Everybody else is having cocktails and you can drink some peanut punch. It's good though.
I mean, honestly, the bar might frown upon you bringing in an outside beverage, but
yeah.
Maybe if you could figure out how to make it into like a cocktail with the bar, you and the bartender could work something out. Like maybe you get a little rum in your peanut punch.
Well, here's how you make it into a delicious cocktail. You ask the bartender for one of those glasses, and then you just pour it in the glass. Because this drink needs nothing. Anything you add to this will make it less perfect.
Is it sweet?
Yeah. It's like a milkshake. A milkshake that tastes like peanut butter. It's awesome.
And what's in it? Is it just blended?
In it?
How do they make it?
It's got 200 calories for a juice box. That's not too many. That's less than like a regular juice box.
What are the ingredients? Is it just
can of
peanuts?
It's water, peanut butter, sugar, skim milk powder, stabilizers, caramel. Caramel. It's got caramel in it. It tastes like it too. Sodium bicarbonate, vanilla flavor, salt. This is like it tastes like
the
peanut butter icing on a cake. It's so yummy.
Exactly. It's like the caramel version of Nutella.
Right.
It's like caramel and peanut version of Nutella.
And by the way, Grace products, if you want to start manufacturing Nutella punch that tastes like chocolate Nutella, I would buy that and drink this on the show too.
All right, so Ben's drinking candy.
Yum.
Should I go next, or you want to go, Patrick?
It matters not. I'll go next.
Okay.
I'm going back to my home state roots, I guess. I'm drinking Gentleman Jack double mellowed. I guess it's not really bourbon, is it? Tennessee sour mash?
It's Tennessee whiskey. It's Tennessee whiskey because of that mellowing process they so proudly put on the label.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between Tennessee whiskey and bourbon is the mash bills are typically the same or very similar. Like you could, it's probably still at least 51% corn. I don't know exactly what it is for Jack Daniels.
Right.
But the Tennessee whiskey distinction, and that this is not like a legal distinction. So bourbon has a lot of like legal rules around it, but Tennessee whiskey is less restrictive than that. But the main thing that Jack Daniels does is they filter their distillate. So the white dog or the white lightning distillate that comes out of the still through 10 feet of maple charcoal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they call the mellowing. So it's essentially just a giant version of a.
So this has been through 20 feet of that, by the way.
Right, exactly. It's double mellowed, and so it's essentially just a giant version of the water filter you would have in like your filter pitcher or on your faucet.
Sure.
And it's funny, because I've lived in that area too. If you go on a tour of like a Tennessee whiskey distillery, they will tell you that like the charcoal filters or removes a lot of the impurities of the distillate, so you get a smoother, mellower flavor on the final product even after it's been in the barrel. And the bourbon people will tell you that it's removing all of the things that give the liquor its character in the first place, and so you're mellowing it beyond where you want it to be. And the thing is, they're both right. So
Sure.
it's really just your lens through which you view it, and do you prefer a more robust, bigger, bolder
Right.
spirit, or do you want something that's like a little more sippable and easy drinking? And they're both valid choices. It's just funny that there's like this weird cultural context through which it gets filtered.
And
in addition to being filtered through the charcoal. Yeah.
Right. I was going to say that after that, I think last time I was on the show, I had that like Brook Laddie Scotch whiskey. And this is like drinking water compared to that. Which, like you say, that's a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you feel.
Well, I mean, I will say, Patrick, in general, it's a bad habit to say that drinking whiskey feels like drinking water. So just monitor that feeling.
All right.
But
tell us what you're up to, Ryan.
Yeah.
I'm in need of some True Respite. Unfortunately, I have some because I have a beer from a brewery called True Respite. And this beer is called Alpin Haus. And it has like... Their label is it's a very interesting, cool label, and it seems like the difference in the labels for each of the individual styles of beer is they have like a keyhole on the can, and through this keyhole you can see a pair of skis and poles stuck in the snow with like a little mountain house and a mountain vista in the background. So a very good beer for winter. This is a stout brewed with smoked and peated malts. So I was actually thinking about you, Patrick, when I saw this, because I was like, Patrick's been getting into things that have been peated, so maybe I should too. And yeah, it's just a really nice wintertime, fun time stout. It's been cold consistently enough that I've wanted more colder weather beers. And since unless we're willing to commit genocide, we're not maybe going to have that much cold that much longer. I better go ahead and enjoy these beers now, right?
Does it taste like peanut butter?
It does not. Patrick's had a
Then
peanut butter.
why would you drink it?
Patrick's had a peanut butter beer on the show before. He did not care for it, Ben, if memory serves.
Well,
Was that sweet baby Jesus?
I think it was.
That's not great. What did you say this is from? Alpin Haus?
That's the name of the beer. This is from a brewery called True Respite, and they're in Deerwood, Maryland, which is like outside Rockville. So I haven't been up to the brewery. I just got this at my local we have like a local little organic store in our neighborhood that has a very good beer selection for being a grocery store ostensibly. So when I was there earlier in the week, I knew I might need something for the show. And so I just like looked around and tried, I'm reaching sort of saturation with my DC beer scene. Like I've had a beer from most of the local breweries on the show at this point. And so I need to start pushing myself to find things that I haven't had before. Otherwise I'm going to start repeating.
Push yourself. I was going to say that Alpin Haus, when I was a kid, I read a book about, it doesn't matter what it was about. It had a character that was named Alphonse, but I'd never heard the name Alphonse. So the whole time I was reading the book, I was pronouncing his name, Alpin Haus.
Oh, nice. Well, this is spelled with the German Haus, Haus, and it's a nice little beer. Well, Patrick, we might not actually have to commit genocide to get rid of all those people because they might just sort of kind of fade away. And that's what we're going to talk about in our next segment, which is coming up just after the break. Ben, we might need you to do some math on this one to check out their facts and figures, but according to an article in Wired interviewing the authors of the new book, Empty Planet, by Daryl Bricker and John Ibbotson, the world might actually run out of people. Patrick?
Yeah.
Wow.
Ben, what do you got?
Well, the article certainly didn't make it seem like that. The article the article covering the book and interviewing the authors made it sound like the world will kind of max out at 9 billion people and not go to 11 billion.
Yeah, Patrick, defend your choice of this article.
Yeah, Patrick. Did you actually read the book or just the article?
I haven't read the book, but I have heard, I mean, for a long time, I've been hearing that, you know, as education levels rise, fertility rates tend to fall. And once the majority of the world sort of gets to industrial and education levels that much of the Western world has gotten to, then we expect that the birth rates are going to fall below death rates and the population will actually start shrinking. Now, when that is actually going to happen is up to a lot of debate. And these authors are just arguing that education is spreading faster than people anticipated, 20 years ago when a lot of these sort of equations and time scales were laid down. Mm-hmm. So they're saying, based on interviews and surveys they've done in Africa and Asian villages where they've seen what the expectations are for women. They talk to women there and talk to them about how many children they think they'll have or would like to have. And basically that's some of the data they're generating to say that this is all happening faster than we think. Like, people are wise to the effects that children are going to have on their livelihood, and the world is changing in ways that has been changing this way for a while, but makes having children more of a handicap rather than something that helps you along in life. So I'm sure I know we've said this several times on the show, and in fact, some not even that long ago, where 100 years ago, if you had a bunch of kids, that was a real asset because, you were likely farming or you were doing something else where more warm bodies meant you could get more work done or be more productive. But that's not really the case now when you're in kind of a knowledge economy and the adults go away to work. They have to pay somebody to take care of the children, to educate the children. And it winds up costing a lot. And it winds up being a real drain on the sort of the household resources. And so the reason you reproduce now are for kind of intangible, personal, cultural reasons, but not to advance, your family's, I don't know, welfare or
prosperity or production,
yeah,
like literally
right.
Your raw production, your ability to produce something like on a farm. Plus with childhood mortality, I imagine there's also a function of childhood mortality rates.
I think that's true.
Being
Yeah.
lower as well. So you don't have to roll the dice as many times to get to. Yeah, that are going to make it to adulthood. Their argument is that the UN's predictions are getting this wrong because the UN is just operating under the assumption, or the equations that they're using are operating under the assumption that population will just tend to go up, and they're not really even considering the fact or considering factors that might make it tend to decline. Is that my?
I mean, I think that's oversimplifying it. I think the UN expects that eventually it will sort of top out, but I think these authors are basically arguing that the cultural awareness of.
They're basically saying we're not giving the developing world enough credit.
Right.
Yeah. Right. That seems like the good summary. I also, okay, so when you imagine you're talking about population decline, you would say that the average expected number of children a couple intends on having is less than 2, right?
Right.
And currently, it's often much higher. I mean, if you think about like my grandparents' generation or my parents' generation, my mom has like 7 siblings and my dad had like 3 siblings, right? So families were pretty big back then for all of the reasons you guys mentioned. Cultural, it's helpful. Expectations, who knows? Well, no, who knows? But the deal here is there's lots of things pushing people to have bigger families. How big a family do you want to have if you have to, if there isn't a farm to go kick them out and make them raise themselves on? And the answer is about 2. So when they're doing these interviews based on this interview of the authors, it looks like the intended number of children people are intending on having is a little over 2 on average. Mm-hmm. So some people are like, I want 2 kids. And some people are like, I want 3 kids. That's still above replacement, right?
Well, people die as well, Ben.
Well, yeah, I know. But like your 2 parents are going to die. And then if there are less than 2 children in your family, the overall population is going to decrease.
Hey, Ben.
And yeah.
It's fewer. Gotcha.
I've just died. The number of people on this podcast is decreased.
Sorry, buddy. I just had to do my Stannis Baratheon on you, but we're good now.
That's fine. So yeah, I'm like, I feel like the headlines for this article, and like honestly, I would want to read the book to tell you. John Ibbotson is one of the authors, and he's a Canadian journalist. He's a little on the conservative side, but he kind of does his homework. He's a pretty sober, political commentary journalist. So he's probably done his homework on this. And I would really want to read it because the headlines of the book and the headlines of these articles are all like, the world's going to run out of people. But really, it looks like people on average want to have about the same number of children as there are raising them. Which means that the population is.
Those are the developing countries that we were counting on having the biggest growth rates in the future, right? I think, though, developed nations tend to be below replacement rate. Like the U.S. would be below, we have negative growth rate if it weren't for immigration. And I'm not trying to get into political. I think that's a fact.
Yep.
That. And that's a good thing for our economy, right? And that's where I thought we'd actually kind of steer this eventually is like, is this a good thing or a bad thing? I'm like, well, it's good for the environment, almost certainly. And it might be bad for the economy.
Isn't there also an issue of like people are living longer, our technology is getting better at keeping people alive, but a lot of times keeping people alive longer also requires some human capital. I've heard that one of the biggest industries we can expect to grow in the next couple of decades is like elder care, like people taking care of the elderly. And sure. I don't know that there's enough people. If you're only reproducing at replacement rate levels, I don't know that there's enough people to designate extra individuals to just take care of the elderly. Not like, and I'm not trying to put any value judgment on that. I'm just saying, like, if you're only reproducing at replacement rate, I almost feel like you need a surplus of people for certain kinds of tasks that maybe wouldn't be incentivized otherwise. And I don't know that you get that if your population is stable.
Well, why would we be worried about? I mean, like, honestly, it's a matter of finding equilibrium, right? And I think I just heard you say that there's no way for there to be an economic equilibrium if there's the same number of people being born as dying. And I'm like, you can get an equilibrium in a village if there's the same number of people being born as dying. You get born and your parents raise you, and then when they get old, you watch it. You take them to bed and watch them die.
Right,
and then that's the cycle.
Not much room for plowing your excess savings into a stock market and watching it grow because companies are assuming there's going to be more demand in the future.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So, I mean, I take Ryan's point in the context of like market capitalism, where we're assuming that there's going to be infinite growth, like growth on infinite timescales. But like growth on infinite timescales is a bonkers assumption to make because the world has a carrying capacity. Like either we're all going to die or we're going to reach an equilibrium. Perpetual growth isn't a reasonable assumption unless you're only talking about shorter timescales.
Well, Ben, I'll go ahead and state another one of my biases with the statement I just made. And like, I'm not saying that statement was brilliant or even correct. I was just thinking out loud with my buddies, which is what this podcast is about. But
it sure is.
I'm also coming from I'm also coming from a cultural context where, like, because I come from immigrants to this country, the United States, from Germany, and like one of my aunts got really into doing like genealogy and stuff like that, and so I can trace back the migration of at least one lineage, one part of my family from like a small village in Germany to a larger town to a city, then like here to America, and every generation has ended up, at least in my particular line, has ended up living not in the same place as their parents. And so that's where I was thinking in terms of like, you have to then make sure that there is a person available where my parents are or where my parents' are, to take care of them when they reach that period of senescence where that's required. And so that was what I was thinking of when I made that statement. And I recognized when you pointed out your critique of it, that like I'm coming from a very specific worldview when I say that.
Oh, I think, the answer to that question is likely, we don't have one person to educate every toddler necessarily, right? A kindergarten class has more than one child in it.
That's why teachers are going on strike all across the country.
Right. So I think that, it's not necessarily a fun answer, but I think that means that like, don't get attention 12 or 24 hours a day. You're one of a class of 30 or 45 that gets checked in on every 2 minutes.
Robots. And also they did point out that like a part of this trend is also being driven by increased urbanization. So we are increasingly urban, and to me, I don't know if you had this thought. The way this article was written, it's become strikingly like Asimov with the iRobot series, where people live in these giant megacities, and you might have a population density of 1 or 2 people per 100 miles outside the cities, because all you need are a few people to monitor the robots that are doing all the farming, and everyone else lives in these giant cities. Yeah. And that does seem to, that trend, again, Ben's point about equilibrium, we might reach equilibrium before we reach that extreme level of hyper-urbanization, but it does seem like the trend of urbanization, both in the developed world and the developing world, is something that is playing a role here, which ties into the whole, if you're not running a farm, you don't need as many kids.
Yeah.
It can be robo-kids.
Robo-kids.
And though your robo-kids running the farm could be like generations older than you.
It's more like robotic harvesters. It's not really, I guess that's your robo-kid, right?
You got to be nice to your robo-kids.
Yeah.
You got to feed them their robo-cookies and make sure their implements are sharp. I don't know.
They're learning their robo times tables.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, robots. This is kind of an interesting conceit, though. Like, not this specific article, but a conceit that this article's tapping into, which are like this concept of like a slow roll apocalypse. Like, we imagine that humanity is going to die out in one big party of, uranium and plutonium. Or global warming is going to cause us all to hole up on one mountaintop, and then we'll drown and get eaten by sharks.
Right. Our endings are nuclear apocalypse, zombie apocalypse, or Mad Max apocalypse.
Yeah, that's right.
But really, we might be in for a Children of Men apocalypse.
Well, there's Children of Men. Even then is a pretty sudden apocalypse.
Yeah, exactly.
These slow roll apocalypses are really. It's a cool conceit, and it's kind of an interesting one because it's kind of optimistic. It's like humanity slowly dies out. There was a time when all the humans on the earth were like, yeah, let's make 6 kids. Each of us will have 6 kids, and then it will be great. And then who knows what'll happen next? They'll go and join the church or something.
So instead of Mad Max, where everyone's just fighting for resources, we have more of a Tatooine situation where it's very hot and it's very dry. But like Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru never had any kids. They just adopted their nephew and then hired robots to do all the other work, right? 3PO's first job was to programming binary load lifters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for all we know, 3PO is, I guess we do know that 3PO is older than Luke and about as old as Owen and Beru. So,
well, you can see, that's all. Thank you, Ryan. It's very relevant.
Ben was talking about multi-generational robots, and so I started thinking about Star Wars as I want to do.
You can see.
Thank you, Ryan. It's so dismissive.
There's places where this has happened, right? Are you talking what I'm saying?
I'm saying you were so dismissive with your thank you, Ryan.
Okay, right. Tell us about the places where there's been a slow roll.
Well, okay, how about Detroit, Ireland, after the potato famine. There are places on Earth where you've seen a population decrease, and it is generally not, at least in the short term, not a good thing for the Rust Belt to some degree.
Oh, but all these dramatic decreases happen over the course of a decade. Right. And that's why they're cataclysmic. The slow roll apocalypse scenario from fiction happens over generations. It's just people, they stop having so many kids, and then society changes and nobody's starving because there's lots to go around because there's fewer people than before, and they maintain all the things. It's just there's, fewer services. 30 years ago, 3 generations ago, my grandparents lived in a high rise with 7 million other people in these super space high rises. And now I'm the only one in this high rise, but I go down and I watch I don't know. But it's really neat, because Ryan was mentioning one, which is the Asimov scenario, where everybody kind of lives in the cities together and the countryside empties out. I read another one that was really bonkers. It was this science fiction future where dogs were all that was left of human civilization.
So our best thing we ever did for the planet is still left.
Yeah.
Phew.
Yeah, we genetically engineered dogs to be able to talk and stuff. And then humans just kind of got agoraphobic. And so instead of all crowding in the cities, like in the Asimov's things, everybody kind of got a palatial country home and went and lived in the country with their family. And then fewer and fewer people did anything. And then humanity's numbers just kind of dwindled. I think they all moved to Jupiter in the end. But it was a really bonkers science fiction story.
It's in one of the later Asimov books where Danil Olov and his partner, I can't remember the human in those books, go to another planet, and that is the setup on that other planet. So the situation of the megacities is just Earth in that world.
Yeah. Yeah. My favorite slow roll apocalypse scenario is from a Japanese comic book. The English translations, and you can only find illegal translations because the publishing company hasn't. Well, come on. They got to publish it. They don't think there's enough interest in it. But it's called Yokohama Kaidashi Kiko, or YKK. And it's about there's some anthropomorphic robots that were bought, and they're just kind of hanging out with the few remaining humans in the village as, everybody watches the tide roll in for the slow roll apocalypse. There's just fewer people, and it's neat. The roads get all overgrown and nobody fixes them. And yeah, it's fun. I mean, it is fun. It's an interesting scenario for the end of humanity because it isn't cataclysmic, but it's also hey, what happens if the world runs out of people? It's just that gas station won't have anybody running it anymore, and that library won't have anybody buying books and throwing books out anymore. Yeah.
What do you think? How do you think libraries work?
There's a librarian that buys books and throws other books out. Gotcha. Sorry, I thought you meant from the user end of the library. I was like, are you buying books at your Canadian library? What's happening up there? Yeah, well, that's how we fund the hospitals.
Here in the U.S., they just give me the books for free at the library. I have to give them back, but there's no
word for that, Ryan. It's communism.
I thought it was just socialism. I didn't think we were full on communist yet.
No, that's communism.
Oh, that's why they called it the community library. They were tricking me the whole time.
The commune itty library.
Dang it. I've been tricked. Been tricked by the glories of socialism. But I always thought that was what was so eerie about Cormac McCarthy's The Road. It's that because of the apocalypse being something, it's hinted at being a nuclear apocalypse. And so all the plants are dead. And that's why it's The Road, because in any apocalyptic scenario where the plants are alive, the roads get overrun and chewed up pretty quickly. But here in this world, the roads are the only thing that's left, and so you can still travel on them, but there's no food anywhere. And so I always thought that was really creepy.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, the book is available now. It's on Amazon. So if you want to get the book and you want to go through it, and you can maybe you can do some math and you can report back and see if their estimates are fair or not.
Well, I don't know. I think it's a reasonable assumption. Also, I'm not sure if these UN projections for human populations that go 100 years in the future can be all that accurate, given like the upcoming really weird cataclysms and huge migrations that we're totally due for as the rainfall patterns change and the
migration's not going to change birth rate of the planet.
Well, yeah, sure it would, right? Like if you have entire countries getting destabilized, then you aren't going to have people who are 20 deciding to settle down and have kids. Instead, you'll have people who are 20 either having lots of kids because they have nothing else to do or having none because they are just walking and harvesting fruit every day.
All right, that's fair enough. I was just thinking about how we traditionally calculate sort of fertility rates or birth rates for countries where basically people migrating in count in your favor.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I think if you look at like one of the most extreme examples, a place like Bangladesh, which has, 164 plus million people. And if you just did population estimates and didn't factor in sea level rise, which I'm not saying you're arguing for, Patrick. I'm just saying, like, if you think about it absent of climate and don't think about the migration that's going to occur as sea level rises, I think your estimates would be way off. Whereas once the sea level starts rising, like the scene in Bangladesh is going to get crazy. And I just picked that as what I could imagine in my head immediately as the most extreme example of a climate-based migration that's probably going to start happening soon.
Right.
Yeah, we're in for some times.
Well, I hope. No, I got nothing. How do we transition out of this, Ben?
I hope Grace doesn't stop making this delicious peanut punch.
Well, if you are also a fan of delicious peanut punch, maybe you'll write in and tell us about it, and in which case you will be featured in our final segment of the show, the PaleoPOW. The PaleoPOW is the final segment of the show where we feature feedback from the listeners. I used to say we deal with feedback from the listeners, but I've been encouraged by Joe Batwinis to put a positive spin on it, and so we're featuring it rather than dealing with it. How do you feel about that, Patrick?
I'm all right with that.
All right. Well, if you're all right with it, why don't you go first then?
Oh man. Okay.
Gotcha.
So we've got, I guess, Bradley S, proud supporter of Science Sorta via Patreon. We need to come up with a thesis for him so he can finally earn his BSso. So what we typically do is sort of blend together some of the topics we talked about in the show in kind of a scientific-y sounding way that could plausibly be a thesis you could present before a upstanding committee. I think we are his thesis committee in this case. And let's see, we're going to need to combine some things about rewilding, possibly, die-off, Malthusian economics, birth rates.
Soylent Green.
Okay, so the theme of this week's show is the world without us.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this is too on the nose. Maybe this is a little too REM, if you will. What if it's a sociological sort of project where he's doing like, it's the end of the world as we know it, but do you feel fine? And then it's like a survey of people about whether or not they're okay, they're feeling fine.
Yeah, like you could call it like analytics of depressing Canadian physicists.
I don't know that Canadian physicists should get such high billing in
today's episode was a bummer.
Yeah, but Brad's thesis is going to fix it, or he's at least gonna
survey people about how they're bummed out.
So I thought like something like, it's the end of the world as we know it, but do you feel fine? ? Meta-analysis of happiness indices regarding population growth and climate change trends around the globe, around the world.
Yeah, that's good.
I do like it. I was really hoping to get Malthus in there, though.
Oh, okay. That's yep. What was Malthus's first name?
I don't know. Let's see what Google says.
Wasn't it Ian? You see him like
Thomas Roberts.
I was going to guess Thomas. I should have said it out loud before you said it. So, dang it, Ben.
Dang it. That's good.
He died in Bath.
Poor guy.
Yeah.
At least he was clean.
Yeah, right.
Finally, a joke. I got a joke in there.
Did he die in his bath?
Did he feel fine? I don't know.
Did he say Eureka and then jump up too quickly and then throw a clot or something and fall over?
Throw a clot.
All right, so it's the end of the world as we know it, but do you feel fine? Meta-analysis of happiness indices regarding impending climate-mediated Malthusian catastrophes.
I like it.
Ben, how do you feel about it?
Well, it's great, except that we're talking about the opposite of Malthusian catastrophes. Isn't the Malthusian catastrophe dramatic overpopulation?
Well, I think it's the...
Throw the word
I guess it is.
Malthusian catastrophes.
Anti-Malthusian. Oh, okay. I kind of like that.
Or how about anti-Malthusian events?
Okay, I can do that. Is there a hyphen between anti and Malthusian?
I think we're probably going to need one there, yeah.
And then it's still a capital M, right?
Sure.
Okay. All
right. Is
right.
it anti with an I or anti with an E?
Anti with a Y, Ben.
A-U-N-T-Y?
No, anti with an E would be before the event, whereas anti would be...
right.
Yeah.
And anti with a Y would be your mother's sisters.
Hey, auntie. All right, so for Bradley, your thesis, should you choose to accept it, and you kind of have to, is it's the end of the world as we know it, but do you feel fine? Question mark. Meta-analysis of happiness indices regarding impending climate-mediated anti-Malthusian events.
Cool.
Sweet.
Well done. Congratulations. You've earned it.
All right, Ben, I have to be honest with you, Ben. There's been a lot of lies. No, there have been very few lies. But I've been dying to have you back on the show since your last appearance. Your last appearance was 3 Wolf Moon, where we talked about wolves and stuff and Europa. And you and I almost got into an argument about the pack dynamics, the social dynamics of coyotes, or coyotes, depending on what part of the world you live in. And we had someone write in.
Yes.
And I've been just eager to have you back on the show so we could get back to talking about things that really matter, wolves and coyotes. So Ben, tell us your PaleoPOW.
All right. Yeah, this is by a listener named Drake. He says, I'm currently listening to episode 286, 3 Wolf Moon, and for the first time in all the years I've been listening, feel compelled to write in. For some background, I'm a graduate student at the University of Delaware studying wildlife ecology. I'm studying the spatial ecology and the survival of wild turkeys. I heard Ben say coyotes don't hunt in packs in the West. While this may happen less in the West because of the large open spaces, it is likely still happening there. It all depends on the different factors affecting each coyote within their range. As far as wolves are concerned, you are correct about all the things that can be used to keep wolves away and out of an area. This is a very convoluted issue. I would, however, like to mention that hunting is a valuable tool to keeping them around. This may seem counterintuitive. I personally have no desire to ever hunt a wolf, not my thing, and I believe they should be reintroduced to all suitable habitats in this country. At some point, you are going to have to control their numbers, though. I would love to see us get predators back to their biological carrying capacity, but unfortunately, we have to deal with social carrying capacity too. The goal is to keep as many people happy as you can while still having a sustainable population. In our country, ranchers have a lot of political power. In places where the population isn't large enough, this management comes in the form of issuing depredation tags. In some states, you don't even need that if you are a landowner. In other places, they have hunting season for them. These hunting seasons actually help pay for the, conservation of the species in most states. Generally, at least some portion of tag sales go to specifically work with involving that species. Also, these animals will be managed whether or not we have hunting season. If there is no hunting season, the population is large enough to cause regulation problems. The state will have to pay someone to euthanize animals to keep people happy. I did not plan on writing this much about this. I guess the shorter way to say it, dang it.
Could have jumped ahead, Ben.
Would be that there has to be a compromise at some point. But we have wolves in places they haven't been in a century. This is exciting, and we should all be excited about it. I love the show, and I hope to be as good as you all at communicating science. Have a great day. All right, thanks, Drake.
Thanks. I would be interested in learning more about the spatial ecology and survival of wild turkeys, wouldn't you, Patrick?
I don't see. Yeah, I'm interested in all things.
That's kind of the point of us starting this show, eh?
Hey.
So Ben, coyotes be hunting in packs. You were against that, and I think you've been corrected.
I can't even remember the trivia I was citing at that episode. Probably, I don't know. I don't think they do. I think I read a thing where
this is such an unsatisfying victory for me.
What do I know about coyotes?
My biggest frustration is that I agree that there's going to have to be a balance struck between the people who live in the area that is having predators reintroduced and the population of the predators themselves. I just get frustrated when, like, the second the animal is taken off the endangered species list, states like Wyoming, where I used to live, immediately start talking about hunting seasons as if just being taken off the endangered species list is enough that, like, now we can start killing them again. I'm like, yeah, how about you take them off the endangered species list and then wait 10 years? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's where I get frustrated. So I think Drake's points are all valid and nuanced and well thought out. I wish conservation-minded people had more political power to push back a little bit harder against the interests of people who just aren't happy about having predators in the environment.
I mean, if you regulate, I mean, like the American alligator is a good example. That if you regulate it and make it rare enough so that hunting is legal, but it's limited, and they would have these where you sign up to hunt on a day. Basically, you're allowed to go try to get one. And there were limits on how large that they had to be, and there were a lot of limitations in place. But essentially, that if something is desired, right, and is worth enough to people, then they will do things to try to generate more of it. And so there is kind of an economic case to allowing hunting can increase the population of something, but it has to be done carefully. You can't just open it up.
Yeah, and I think I am philosophically on one side of the issue far enough that, like, I'm probably not the person who can make a reasonable accession there. I'm probably going to always be pushing for the more conservation-minded approach to things and be less accommodating to hunters. So, I'm not saying I would never be open to a compromise. I also have no political power in this situation, but, like, if I'm playing the role-playing game where I'm the person who gets to choose, the hunting season or the kill count or whatever, I can see myself finding ways to compromise, but I am of a mind where I constantly want to be pushing us more into a pure conservation mindset and find ways to live with the predators in ways that don't involve just shooting them, which is what we talked about in that episode, Ben, where we talked about, like, how you can put up barriers or how you can create, like, noise, deterrence or light deterrence, or just having a person there, like, not necessarily a person there to kill them, but just a person watching the herd and scaring off wolves. Like, those things all work and no wolves die. And I've talked about it before, but, like, there are more cynical people than myself who talk about, like, the organic food movement as just a completely commercial and cynical enterprise of just, you can charge $1 more for your milk by saying it's organic, even if it's not, because there's a lot of cheating in the organic food system. Sorry to point that out. And not that there wouldn't be cheating in this system too, but sell your beef for $1 more and call it wolf safe beef because you pledge not to shoot wolves. You know? Yeah, maybe you lose cattle to the wolves occasionally, but if you price it accordingly such that you're making up for that economic loss by charging more for your beef, and then people like me who are trying to cut back on their consumption of beef just because of the environmental impact and the health impact of my own body, if I'm gonna go buy beef, the times that I do, and there's a choice between a less expensive conventionally farmed piece of beef and a quote unquote wolf safe beef, and I trust the labeling or I trust the whatever, then maybe I use my purchasing power to shift the conversation that way.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I feel like there's a lot of different drivers and motivations and effects that hunting can have. There's some people who are like, oh, I don't like that animal. I have no evidence that it's actually bringing down my herd, but it looks really suspicious and I want to murder all of them. And there are some hunting groups that are like, hey, let's just bring people in so they can hunt them and kill them all. And then who cares what happened? I've made my money. And there's other groups and people who, entire communities in Canada sometimes where their entire economic base is, hunting tourism.
Yeah.
And it's like those groups and communities often have a real vested interest in making sure that their numbers of animals that they cull is sustainable, because otherwise it's not going to be any left. And then there's like hunting for the sake of culling. Like in BC, just a handful of years ago, there was a big controversy because the caribou are dying out in the southern ranges. And the caribou are dying out, mostly habitat loss, right? So forestry is driving it. Forestry, roads, not managing things properly. Essentially, it's land use issues. But the government's like, oh, we need to save the caribou. Let's just cull the wolf packs. Let's just open season on killing wolves. And it's like, what? That's not. And they're like, well, the wolves are eating the caribou. And it's just like, well, yeah, okay, so the wolves might eat the last caribou, but it's the last caribou for a reason. You know, in those cases, it's bad policy that's displacing mismanagement onto where the solution, the easy to explain solution is like hunting. So I'm totally on the fence on this because I'm like, well, if you do it right, then it's a good thing. People eat what they kill sometimes. That's a good thing.
Not wolves, though.
On the other hand,
you wouldn't eat a wolf.
Why not?
People tend to not like eating apex predators, other apex predators, and also like, and Ben, I think everything you said is valid. And you know, growing up in West Virginia, like deer hunting is a huge part of the culture there, and people will say that like, well, isn't it better if I just go kill one deer and feed my family for the winter? And I'm like, sure it is. And then they also say like, don't we have to cull the population of deer? Because if we don't, then there's too many deer. They start dying out because when your population density reaches a certain point, disease transmission becomes easier. So you can get a disease that spreads through the population, or they can overeat the environment and then they start starving to death, or they're just too many on the roads and you have, you know, fatalities of both deer and people from incidences on the road. And I'm like, yeah, that's all true, but that's all also because we've already killed all the predators. Yeah. So there is a special role that predators play in an environment. And when you lose that, suddenly culling herbivores becomes the thing you have to do. And Ben, I agree with you. Like, it's completely nonsensical to kill wolves to control the caribou population because that's, yeah.
Yeah, no.
Yellowstone has shown us that ecosystems work better when you have some predators around, I think. That's been one of the lessons I've taken away from it.
There are so many nuisance deer in our community. Like literally, you can't leave my house without seeing a deer in my yard. They're not really a nuisance to me. Yeah, like, yeah, man, if there were wolves in the street, I'd be happy. That'd be cool. I mean, I guess you'd have to like watch your kid.
Well, that was Canada. Like, I thought honestly, that was basically what went on up there.
Yeah, right.
I don't have wolves just roaming the streets.
I mean, Ben, there's a reason that, you know, a lot of the European fairy tales are, the lesson from the fairy tale is basically stay out of the woods. There's wolves there. Like, yeah. You have to scare the children not to go near the wolves.
Listen, as far as I'm concerned, all the houses are made of brick. We're fine.
They can't blow your house down. Is that what you're saying?
Nobody's making their house out of
Nobody's making houses out of candy.
No, yeah, I was going to say, Ben, what you forgot about that one woman who lives in the woods who has the candy house.
Well, she doesn't need to worry about wolves because wolves can't blow over candy.
Plus, you know, most predators don't have like the taste for sweet anymore, so the wolves aren't going to go want a sweet treat.
I bet they would. I bet if you made a house out of candy and put like one of those wildlife cameras on it, you could get some pretty great videos of wolves looking.
I don't think it'd be wolves. I think you'd get a lot of rodents.
Oh yeah.
Some birds.
But then the wolves would come in to eat the rodents and then be like a dog would totally lick the candy.
Oh, yeah, right.
Well, yeah, but dogs are, I mean,
you get the dog away from it. So why wouldn't the wolf?
Like, because dogs are broken wolves.
I think he might be right. Hey, no. Right. Don't you try to get out of your PaleoPOW every time.
My PaleoPOW is a Facebook message from Kyle W. Kyle asks, like how quickly I just ran with your forced transition, Patrick.
It was a good transition.
Good job running the show, Patrick. Kyle wants to know, where can I buy a Science Sort of t-shirt? Link on the website not working.
Yeah.
What do you have to say for yourself, Patrick?
I'm glad this is yours.
So we no longer are selling t-shirts directly on the website just because while that was fun for us, it's super exciting to like see people out in the world with our t-shirts. That was never a huge moneymaker, and the ability for us to use like sort of the print on demand services, that internet kind of shifted away from that. And so you started having to do like print runs of things. And we just don't have the demand for t-shirts to maintain a consistent supply of the, you know, mass printed t-shirts. So what I will say is before Patrick went to England, he handed over the remaining supplies of t-shirts. So if you are interested in a t-shirt, you can write in at the contact form at scienceorb.com. Tell me your size, and I'll let you know if we have that size available. And if so, we can, set up a transaction where I will ship you that t-shirt. So that is something I'm open to doing. And that's what I messaged Kyle back.
Oh, excellent.
Directly.
Kyle, I will just say that these t-shirts are kind of on the metrosexual side. So you might want to go up a size from what you might be thinking.
Is that what that means now?
It means they're slimming. They're very svelte.
Metrosexual is synonymous with not Walmart sized.
And then because the economics of scale, our audience is we have a nice sized audience, but our audience isn't quite big enough that we can maintain a constant supply of t-shirts, which is one of the reasons that we have that as a goal on Patreon. So if you go to our Patreon, you'll see that when we reach $500 a month, which is our next goal, we say cups and coasters times, which means that we will get Thomas, our designer who did the website and has done the newer versions of the logo. He will design a limited print run of cups, coasters, or some other basically merch with the logo with the Brachylope on it. And that very well may include t-shirts. We'll at least have a t-shirt designed, and then probably the people who are our Patreon supporters will get first crack at those. So if you are interested in unlocking that as a goal or a thing that happens for the future of the show, patreon.com/sciencesortof is where you can go to join in on that. And I will also say that with the thesis we just handed out today, we are very close to the end of our list of patrons needing theses. So if you are considering signing up, we are very forgiving and lax about, people's changing financial situations or changing financial priorities. But one of the rules we told ourselves, so, we have a page on the website that's all like thanking the patrons. And basically we're going to put you on that page at the highest level you are able to give at for whatever period of time you're able to give at it. So we've had plenty of people give at the level to get a thesis and then drop down to a lower level once they've gotten a thesis, or once it just wasn't worth it for them to maintain that. But we'll still give you a thesis, and we'll keep you at that level on the website, because we're not about downgrading anybody. We're going to honor you at the highest level you were able to give for any period of time. So I just want to put that out there as like, we're trying to make everybody happy and just have a good time with it. It's not, there's no like punishment structure built into the Patreon. It's all about just giving rewards and having a good time and being part of the community. Right, Patrick?
Yeah, I think probably all of us, when you give to something that you care about, you feel good about it when you listen to it, or you watch it, or you however you consume that thing. When you helped it out, it sort of gives you a nice feeling every time you're reminded of it. So I think you get something back just by knowing that you helped us make the show.
So that's where we're at with that. Ben, where are you at with your podcasting activities, proclivities?
I'm working on the behind the scenes stuff on my podcast. The Titanium Physicist podcast will be back this spring.
Great. Looking forward to it, man.
Wait, when does spring start?
March 21st.
The Groundhog says it already started.
The Titanium Physicist podcast will be back this early summer.
Great.
There's a lot of work.
Well, we appreciate all the work you do, Ben, and we appreciate having you back on the show today.
This is fun.
Yeah, man. Yeah. For all the depressing topics that Patrick wanted us to talk about.
All right, this was a bummer.
It wasn't fun at all, Patrick. You tricked us into being
We're
sad.
dying, but that might be a good thing.
And with that, be sure to come back next time, where hopefully we'll have a bit more optimistic stories. But regardless of whether they're optimistic, pessimistic, or hemiistic, just right there in the middle, we can guarantee that you'll get a whole lot more science.
Sort of.
Visit sciencesortof.com for show notes, links to all the stories we talked about, and ways to interact with the hosts, guests, and other listeners. Science Sort of is brought to you by the Brachylope Media Network of podcasts, with audio engineering by Tim Dobbs of the Encyclopedia Brunch podcast. That's all for this week. See you next time on Science Sort of.
Good job, Ben.
Thank you. The inspiration was right in front of me.
It's like riding a bike, eh? I only ever use A when I'm talking to you. It's like I slip into it. It's a useful.
That seemed very subconscious.
Usually your favorite vowel is E, but when I'm around, it's A.
I don't know if my favorite vowel is E. I feel like my favorite vowel might be sometimes Y.
Sometimes.
Something. Well, yeah, it's not
It's
always
not your
a vowel.
favorite if it's only there sometimes.
I think that's what makes it my favorite is its impermanence. I
Yeah,
like
it's impermanence on your list of favorite vowels.
No, it's impermanence as a participant in being a vowel.
It's fleeting, so you
Yeah.
got to appreciate it while it's there.
The absence makes the heart grow fonder.
What constitutes a vowel?
A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y.
Yeah, but why? How'd they make that list?
I don't know. Maybe go. I don't know.
I think it's sounds you can make without touching any part of your mouth together.
A speech
Well, how
sound.
do you-
Wait. A speech sound which is produced by a comparatively open configuration of the vocal tract with vibration of the vocal cords, but without audible friction, and which is a unit of the sound system of the language that forms the nucleus of the syllable.
Isn't that almost what I said?
Yeah, I think so. But
No,
how,
I think
try saying a word with Y in it that involves closing your mouth with the Y part. You very.
Yeah, it's in like fly.
Griffin.
Well, it's not a vowel in.
It's a vowel in Griffin.
Sure, but not in you.
Sometimes Y.
I'm not closing my mouth though. Very. You can replace it with
sure.
E's.
I think it is.
Like
I think it is a vowel in Barry.
Maybe in American English, but in the Queen's English, it shouldn't be. I snorted.
All right, we're gonna go into our next segment now.
We're gonna PaleoPOW.
I have to edit this.